up on this Friday edition of Newsline at noon, Korea slams Japan for trying to whitewash its landmark apology for wartime sex slavery as the Abe administration readies to announce its review of the so-called Kono statement. President Obama is sending 300 U.S. military advisors to Iraq to help Iraqi forces contain rising Islamist insurgency there. Plus, in Brazil, England's World Cup dream is hanging by a thread after Luis Suarez scores twice to earn Uruguay a 2-1 win. Colombia makes it 2 wins from 2, beating Cote d'Ivoire. These stories and more on Newsline at noon. It's noon Friday, June 20th here in Korea. Thanks for tuning in. Live from Seoul, I'm Ju.
It's very good to have you with us on this Friday lunchtime. I'm Mark Broom. And our top story today, South Korea has condemned Japan over its plans to release the results of its examination to verify the country's official apology for its wartime system of sexual slavery.
The report on the so-called Kono statement is due out later on this Friday. The Kono statement, issued in 1993, is the Japanese government's acknowledgment and apology for its army's sexual enslavement of women and girls before and during World War II. Speaking at the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva on Thursday, South Korean ambassador to the UN in Geneva, Choi Seok-young, called Japan's probe into the apology deplorable and regrettable. So, in a couple of hours' time, a parliamentary committee in Japan will hear the results of the Abe administration's review of the Kono statement. A lot depends on what the review suggests, of course, but any hint of a revision will send another chill down already frosty Korea-Japan relations. Yoo Di-an reports.
Japan's Deputy Chief Cabinet Secretary Katsunobu Gato is set to announce the result of a review on the Kono statement Friday at a House of Representatives Budget Committee meeting. The statement was issued back in 1993 by then Chief Cabinet Secretary Yohei Kono and acknowledged for the very first time the Japanese Imperial Army had forced women, euphemistically called comfort women, into sexual slavery during World War II. In February, Japan said it would re-examine the statement, drawing strong criticism from Korea, who slammed the neighboring country for its continued efforts to deny its historical wrongdoings. Speculation on the result of the review are running high, with concerns that Tokyo may try to revise or backtrack on the statement, given that Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe had said in the past that he did not believe women were coerced to work in military brothels. Japanese media reported earlier this week that the review will say the exact wording of the Kono statement was influenced by Korean bargaining. Seoul said it stands ready to counter the results of the examination and emphasized that the statement was made on Japan's own accord. Yoo Di-an, Arirang News.
Now, Japan stands in great contrast to Germany when it comes to handling its wartime atrocities. Almost 70 years after the end of World War II, German authorities this week tracked down a former Nazi who's been living in the United States for decades. The 89-year-old, who will likely be extradited to Germany, is set to answer to the long-standing charges against him. Kwon Choi reports.
Nearly 70 years have passed since the Second World War ended. 89-year-old Johann Breyer was 17 when he joined the Nazi military as a guard and for the past 6 decades has been living in the United States. But this week, Breyer was arrested in Philadelphia upon Germany's request on charges of having aided in the killing of 216,000 German, Hungarian, and Czechoslovakian Jews in Auschwitz.
His guarding in the Death's Head battalion that he belonged to made it possible for those killings.
There's a good chance that Breyer will now be turned over to Germany as the U.S. has an extradition treaty with the country. 10 years ago, a U.S. court ruled that Breyer was not responsible for his acts during World War II because he was so young when he joined the Nazis. Breyer, who has been living in the States since the 1950s, has claimed he was forced to carry out the heinous acts. Despite that, Germany never stopped looking for evidence and recently found out that Breyer had received several awards for his active participation in the genocide of Jews. Germany's persistence in punishing those responsible for past wrongdoings continues to gain attention here in Korea, as it stands in stark contrast to Japan's attitude towards its past atrocities. Japanese authorities have done little to nothing to compensate or apologize to the women that were forced into sexual slavery by Japanese troops in the early 20th century. Kwon So-ah, Arirang News.
South Korea's military has warned that North Korea's mid-range missiles could possibly hit Seoul without being intercepted. This is according to South Korea's defense ministry, who analyzed the two mid-range Nodong missiles that were test-fired by the North back in March. Officials say Pyongyang fired the missiles to see if they could avoid potentially South Korean or American missile interception systems. This is because even though the missiles have a range of around 1,300 kilometers, the missiles were launched at a higher angle than usual, meaning they only traveled about half their flight span before dropping into the East Sea. By launching them much higher, officials say North Korea could get past South Korean and US missile interception systems. Now, South Korea and the US appear to be inching closer to putting pen to paper on a long-stalled civilian nuclear pact. Seoul-based broadcaster YTN reports that high-ranking Korean officials recently told reporters in Washington that two sides are fine-tuning the wording of a new draft and hope to have it signed by the end of this year. The two sides held the 10th round of nuclear negotiations earlier this week. Korea has been pushing to upgrade its strategic nuclear partnership with Washington, as the current agreement, signed all the way back in 1974, restricts Korea from enriching uranium and reprocessing spent fuel. This has slowed Korea's attempts to broaden its exports of nuclear power plants. The current agreement was recently extended to 2016.
Stay up to date on the latest news out of Korea, connecting to our team of reporters about the issues that matter to Korea. On air, on your mobile, online. Find out more about Korea on NEWSLINE at Noon with Mark Broom and Jin-ju.
I'm Jin-ju with Pro.
Market researcher, strategy analytics, said Thursday that LG Electronics brought in about.
And on the last day of government questioning at the National Assembly this Friday, lawmakers put the spotlight on President Park Geun-hye's nominee for Education Minister and asked whether he was qualified for the post. Kim Myung-soo has been accused of publishing a research paper on his own name after summarizing a dissertation of one of his students while serving as a professor at Korea National University of Education. Opposition party lawmakers also raised concerns about Kim's conservative stance on historical and educational issues, saying it could set the stage for clashes with liberal school superintendents who were elected in the June 4th local elections. Rival parties then bickered over Thursday's ruling over the Progressive Teachers Union, which lost a legal suit on its legal status, allowing the government to deregister the controversial organization. Hyundai Motor has emerged as the best non-luxury auto brand in the United States, and only 3 other luxury brands performed better than the Korean car maker in quality survey for 2014 model vehicles. Kim Ji-yeon has the details.
Hyundai Motor Group has been rated as the #1 automaker among non-luxury brands for making quality cars. In a 2014 survey by U.S. researcher J.D. Power, Hyundai, which includes the Kia brand, beat the likes of General Motors and Toyota in new car quality. Hyundai rose 4 ranks from last year, while last year's best performer GM fell to 3rd place and Toyota moved up 1 notch to the 2nd place this year. Including luxury brands, Hyundai ranked 4th place in quality ranking after Porsche, Jaguar, and Lexus. It moved up 6 notches from last year. 5 models from Hyundai and Kia brands were voted as the best performers in 5 vehicle categories in the 2014 survey by J.D. Power, which is widely followed for car quality. They included Hyundai's Genesis, which topped in the mid-size premium car segment. Hyundai's Accent and Elantra won the honor in the small car and compact car segment, respectively. Kia Sportage and Cardenza ranked the highest in the small SUV and large car segment, respectively. This year's study was based on feedback from more than 86,000 drivers of new 2014 model year vehicles after 90 days of ownership. The study was conducted from November last year to May this year. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
The number of millionaires worldwide grew at the fastest pace since the year 2000 last year on higher economic growth and rising stock markets around the world. According to the latest World Wealth Report by Capgemini and RBC Wealth Management, the number of people with at least $1 million in investable assets rose 15% from a year ago to 13.7 million. The amount of money they hold also grew by 14%, marking a record high $52.5 trillion US. North America is still home to more millionaires than any other region, but Asia Pacific is catching up very fast and is actually forecast to overtake North America this year. Now, back here in Korea, and what appears to be a clear shift away from tradition. A poll has found that 4 out of 10 women in Seoul now consider marriage an option only, not a necessity. According to a report by the metropolitan government, nearly 40% of women said that tying the knot was a matter of choice. This based on a survey on Seoulites aged 13 and older back in 2012. The figure compares with the 28% recorded by males. Such changes in marriage notions has also raised the average age for marriage. The average age at which women get married stood at 30.4 years in 2013, in Seoul that is. That's up almost 5 years from 20 years ago. Nearly half of Seoul women aged between 25 and 39 were single as of 2010. That's up about 20% from 1995.
Let's now continue on with our coverage of the 2014 Brazil World Cup with 3 more group games taking place earlier today.
Yeah, 3 exciting games in their own way, but whether we like the result or not, we now have a better idea about which teams from Group C and D will qualify for the knockout stages. As always, our sportscaster S.J. Lee has the details. Good afternoon.
And good afternoon to you guys as well as we continue on with our 2014 Brazil World Cup coverage with some matches that took place earlier today, this including Ivory Coast and Colombia, who both had a chance to advance to the next round. And of course, taking a look at the highlights here, both sides go scoreless in the first half of the match, but all the action in the second half as Colombia's James Rodriguez opens up the scoring in the 64th minute, followed by Juan Quintero's goal in the 70th minute for a 2-0 lead. Ivory Coast would get on the score sheet in the 74th minute thanks to Gervinho, but Colombia gets the win 2-1 and advances to the next round. Meanwhile, England and Uruguay squaring off, both sides neck and neck until the 38th minute when Luis Suarez heads in the first goal of the match, giving Uruguay the 1-0 lead. But the second half, Wayne Rooney, who had a hard time scoring in the World Cup, finally finds one back of the net as he gets the equalizer in the 75th minute. Looked to be a draw until Luis Suarez strikes once again, this time in the 85th minute, giving Uruguay the 2-1 lead and the win. And lastly, Japan and Greece facing off as both teams try to avoid the elimination with a loss, but Greece down a man in this match after a second yellow. But despite the disadvantage, their defense steps it up as both teams draw 0-0. And with the Korea-Algeria match taking place 4 p.m. Sunday local time and 4 a.m. Monday morning Korea time, the Taekwondo Warriors must win in order to increase their chances of advancing to the next round. So let's now take a look at Algeria's strengths and weaknesses going into this match. And of course, taking a look at their strengths first, Algeria is now known for their defense, but they tend to defend early in the match and tend to do a good job with it. But when it comes to their offense, they use the long ball to score, which means the Korean defense needs to focus, especially the center backs. And another crucial thing to watch out for is their ability to score on the headers. And since Korea is very weak against the set piece, something they need to focus on. Meanwhile, taking a look at their weakness this time, they're just not the best defenders, especially on the wing, which means Son Heung-min and Lee Chung-young will be crucial to Korea's success. But just like I said before, they need to be very aggressive on the offense all throughout the 90 minutes, but at the same time, make sure they don't get countered. Now, Paul the Octopus was the oracle of the 2010 World Cup, predicting the winners of the 7 matches that the German team played and even the outcome of the semifinals games. This time, it's Lee Young-pyo, a Korean commentator, following the path as the predictor who has already hit the outcome of the games. Now, Shin Se-min tells us more.
Paul, the Octopus, and the prognosticating Turtles of Brazil have nothing on Korean broadcaster Lee Young-pyo. The commentator for Korea Broadcasting Station has been accurately predicting the winners and even the scores of this year's World Cup in Brazil. Early on Korea's match against Russia this week, a retired Korean national soccer player, said forward Lee Geun-ho was capable of piercing the Russian defense and added that if Team Korea could hold on until the 70th minute of the match, a chance would present itself. And one did. 60 minutes in and just 12 minutes after stepping onto the pitch for the first time, Lee Geun-ho fired a long-range shot that found its way to the back of the net. But commentator Lee's predictions don't end there. Last month, during the World Cup preliminary ground stage, he said that the Spanish national team was entering a dark period. That turned out to be an accurate call, as well as the defending champs have already been knocked out from advancing. Lee's prediction for the games and scores between Italy and England and Ivory Coast against Japan also turned out to be right. Lee, an ex-Tottenham Hotspur defender, insisted that his forecasts were hardly lucky guesses, but that hasn't stopped people from referring to him as the next Paul the Octopus. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
And finishing things off with Portugal losing to Germany 4-0 in their first match. Their next match against USA is a crucial one, but world-class footballer Cristiano Ronaldo might not be able to play for the rest of the World Cup, with the latest MRI showing serious pressure on the patellar tendon in the Portuguese winger's left knee. His team doctor warned Ronaldo that further playing with the injury could lead to tearing the tendon beyond repair. Dr. Jose Carlos Noronha, who performed numerous surgeries on some of the top footballers in the world, added that he needs to take 2 months off from the game now if he hopes to fully repair the injured knee. And that's going to wrap it up for me. This has been SJ. Have a great rest of the day and see you guys again for your sports needs.
Now, while we're cheering, Koreans love to eat fried chicken and drink beer and in any other big sporting events, but this combination is actually so popular that it has its own name, chimek.
Yes, it is extremely popular, and World Cup time is usually the big boom time in actual fact, but with most of the games unfortunately starting so early in the morning here in Korea, Korean fans are having to get their snack food from elsewhere. Kim Hyun-bin reports.
Chimek, a word that combines chicken and the Korean word for beer, mekju, is the go-to food and drink during sporting events here in the nation.
Statistics back it up. During the 2010 World Cup in South Africa, sales of chicken and beer in Korea almost doubled compared to the same period in the previous year. A similar effect was seen during the 2006 World Cup. But the effect has been muted during this year's global event, mainly due to the time difference between Brazil and Korea. In many ways, it's a repeat of what was seen during the 2010 World Cup, when sales were up for games watched in the evening here in Korea. As for Korea's early morning match against Nigeria, it was a much different story. Although sales were up, they paled in comparison to figures from the night games. While Team Korea plays its games in Brazil, it will be the early morning here in Korea. a fact that doesn't please chicken franchises.
The World Cup games are starting in the wee hours this year. Chimek was not part of the hype, so sales have been lower than expected.
Although it's clear that fried chicken and beer businesses won't see sales go through the roof, as in past World Cup events, there's a certain type of business that's benefiting from the Brazil-Korea time difference. It's the 24-hour convenience store.
Sales have gone up since the World Cup started, especially snacks and ready-to-eat meals. CU also has World Cup promotions to attract customers.
According to CU, a major convenience store franchise, sales of ready-to-eat meals and snacks were up 15%, bottled water up over 50%, and coffee up nearly 10% during the first week of the Brazil World Cup, compared to a week earlier. Kim Hyun-bin, Arirang News.
Time now for a look through the international headlines we're following this hour. For that, we turn to our Eunice Kim, standing by at the News Center.
So, Eunice, the U.S. is stepping into Iraq once again, but this time a little differently. President Obama is sending a substantial group of military advisors to Iraq, but they won't be on the front lines.
That's right. He's ordering some 300 military advisors to back up Iraqi security personnel in their fight against ISIL militants. This also comes amid calls for Iraq's prime minister to be replaced. Here's Connie Lee with the story.
Washington is extending a much-needed helping hand to Iraq. The U.S. has decided to send about 300 military advisors to help Iraqi troops fight off insurgents. This nearly 3 years after President Barack Obama pulled the last U.S. troops out of the country. President Obama made it clear, though, that the help this time around will not be in combat.
American forces will not be returning to combat in Iraq, but we will help Iraqis as they take the fight to terrorists who threaten the Iraqi people, the region.
In a briefing at the White House on Thursday, Obama also stressed the need for Iraq's government to be more inclusive.
It is clear, though, that only leaders that can govern with an inclusive agenda are going to be able to truly bring the Iraqi people together and help them through this crisis. Meanwhile, the United States will not pursue military options that support one sect inside of Iraq at the expense of another.
He added that the U.S. is not in position to choose Iraq's leaders. But citing support from the U.S., some political leaders in Iraq are calling for the prime minister to be replaced. Nouri al-Maliki has come under fire for his sectarian policies, favoring Shiite interests, and is widely blamed for the spiraling Sunni insurgency. The insurgents, called the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, or the ISIL, are now in control of many of Iraq's northern cities. And the ISIL, now eyeing Baghdad, poses the greatest threat to Iraq's security since the U.S.-led invasion back in 2003. Connie Lee, Arirang News.
Ukraine's President Petro Poroshenko is gathering support for his peace settlement plan this day after declaring a unilateral ceasefire in the embattled east. According to Russia's ITAR-TASS news agency, Poroshenko said Kiev's forces will put down their arms only briefly and called on, quote, illegal armed units to do the same for order to be established. He renewed an offer of amnesty as well as an escape corridor for militants to disarm and leave Ukraine. He also called for tighter border control between Ukraine and Russia. And 1 week from today, the Ukrainian leader will sign the controversial EU association agreement, the very deal that ousted President Viktor Yanukovych had refused to sign, triggering the prelude to the Ukraine crisis. And finally, political tensions are building in Hong Kong as a group of activists will stage an unofficial referendum beginning today through Sunday, demanding a democratic ballot law for future elections. The controversial electronic vote is poised to further upset China's communist leaders. The group, dubbed Occupy Central, are calling for Hong Kong residents to be given the right to choose their own leader. China, under a one-country, two-systems approach, had been hand-selecting Hong Kong's chief executive via a committee of allies since the handover in 1997. But in 2017, it promised a free election, though the candidates would still be decided by a Beijing-friendly committee.
Good afternoon. Today's weather looks to be similar to previous days. The sun will be hiding behind the clouds most of the time, and it will get gloomier as the day goes on. And temperature-wise, the capital and its surrounding areas will have a hotter afternoon, while the southern regions should see a tad cooler readings today. And the monsoon front will move northward again tonight, dropping rain on Jeju from late at night, and Jeju and other southern coastal regions will receive monsoon rain till Sunday morning. And there's also a chance of showers here in Seoul tomorrow, and temperatures will hover in the mid to upper 20s over the weekend. With that, here are the readings for today. The afternoon high in Seoul will rise to 29, while Daegu and Gwangju peak to 27 and 30, while Busan peaks at 24. Now for other regions, down on Jeju should see a high of 25, while Daejeon and Dokdo reaches to 29 and 19. Well, that's all for me this week, and hope you have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you very much for the weather there, Gianna. And those are the stories we're following at this hour.
Mark and I'll be back at the same time on Monday. Have a great weekend.